Reynolds grabbed her left arm without warning, twisted it hard behind her back, and slammed her face against the hood with a force meant to break her silence. The metal shook beneath her. Pain shot through her ribs. Benson stepped in at once, drove his knee into her spine, and tightened the cuffs until her wrists bled. The humiliation landed as sharply as the impact. She felt the shock move through her chest, yet she remained still because stillness was the only control she had in that moment. Neither man knew that this action, carried out in the rain without a second thought, would destroy their careers and expose the system they believed would always protect them. Before going into this story, tell me where you are watching from, and if these true accounts matter to you, subscribe to the channel and give me a like. It helps more people understand what happened on this night. Captain Aisha Johnson had entered Beverly Hills in silence. No badge, no uniform, only dark jeans, a long coat, and a hidden camera pinned beneath the fabric. She drove a rented black Lexus through the steady rain. Her mind remained steady, controlled, prepared. Commissioner Marcus Hale had asked her for something no one else could do. 77th is a place where truth disappears. I need someone they do not recognize. She agreed because something far older than duty lived inside her. In 2009, her older brother, Marcus Jr., had been shot 11 times by officers from the same division she was now preparing to lead. He held a phone. They claimed a threat. No one had paid a price. Tonight she came as bait. She knew she would be stopped. She knew the moment would come without warning. The only question was how far they would go. She drove slowly along the dark street when the first flash of blue and red lit the rain-soaked pavement behind her. She pulled over. Her breath remained steady. Her hands rested calmly on the wheel. Reynolds moved first. His posture held a confidence that had grown unchecked for years. Benson followed, slower, unsteady, carrying the heaviness of someone who lived too often at the bottom of a bottle. They approached without hesitation. Reynolds ripped the door open with practiced force. His hand closed around her arm before she could finish her first sentence. He pulled her out and slammed her body against the hood. Benson stepped in behind her. His knee pinned her lower back. His weight made her breath short. Rain slid across her face. The cuffs tightened again when Reynolds jerked her arms upward. The pain spread from her shoulders to her wrists. The cold metal pressed against her cheek. She inhaled through the ache and memorized every second. A third patrol car rolled by. Sergeant Michael Walsh slowed only enough to see her restrained in the rain. He did not stop. He did not question. He drove on with the calm acceptance of a man who had seen this many times and never intervened. His silence carried the weight of years of buried complaints and dismissed reports. His silence was the reason Aisha had come. The rain kept falling. Her coat clung to her back. Water gathered at her collar. She knelt beside the car when they forced her down again. The pavement pressed against her knees. She kept her breathing slow. She counted each violation in her mind. She cataloged every word, every action, every breach of policy. She knew the rules better than any of the men standing above her. She also knew they expected no consequences. They believed she would leave with a warning, a scar, and a memory she would try to forget. They did not know who she was. They did not know who she would become to them. 90 minutes passed in the rain. Her wrists throbbed. A warm line of blood mixed with water at the edges of the cuffs. Reynolds paced with satisfaction. Benson muttered criticisms he did not expect her to hear. She said nothing. Her silence became her shield. Across the street, behind a window overlooking the scene, Elena Ramirez raised her phone. She had come to visit her daughter. She heard the shouting. She saw the woman pinned to the car. Her Ring camera began recording before she thought to speak. The lens captured every moment, the rain, the force, the indifference. Later, That recording would become the heartbeat of a national awakening. At the station, they processed her without urgency. She remained calm when they removed her from the car. She knew the steps she needed to take. She made one phone call. She spoke one code phrase. Commissioner Hale answered on the second ring. His voice did not rise. He simply said, "Release her. Now." The officers in the room changed. Their faces shifted. Their movements grew uncertain. They handed her belongings back. No one explained anything. No one asked a question. She walked through the station door with a quiet strength that belonged to someone who knew every truth would surface soon. She stepped into the early morning air. The bruises on her wrists pulsed with each breath. She felt the ache across her ribs. She looked at the empty street. She understood what that night would become. It was not an incident. It was evidence. It was the exact truth she needed to expose a broken division. Before dawn, Elena uploaded her video. By the next hour, it traveled across the city. By sunrise, the country. By noon, the Department of Justice. The storm had begun, and the men who pinned her to the hood had no idea what they had unleashed. The rain had stopped by the time they released Aisha, but the damage remained written across her skin. Her wrists throbbed with each pulse, the cuffs having carved thin lines that still burned long after she stepped out of the station. She moved with quiet steadiness, her breathing controlled, her thoughts sharp. She knew the night had given her everything she needed. 90 minutes on the pavement, 90 minutes of unlawful detention, 90 minutes of force used without cause, and 90 minutes of evidence she could prove. As she walked away from the building, she felt the ache in her shoulders, the tight pull across her ribs, and the lingering sting along her spine. Each sensation reminded her that what had happened was not an accident. It was a pattern she had come to expose. She reached for her phone and made her second call. The call she had been instructed to make only after she gathered sufficient proof. Commissioner Hale answered at once. His voice was firm. "You did what you needed to do. Now let the city see the truth." She hung up and kept moving. She said nothing to anyone on the sidewalk. Her silence became the single thread holding her discipline together. She did not allow herself to feel anger. She allowed herself only intention. Across the city. Elena Ramirez sat at her kitchen table. Her hands trembled slightly as she replayed the footage from her Ring camera. She watched the officers drag Aisha from the Lexus. She watched the violent twist of her arm. She watched the knee pressed into her back. She watched the cuffs tighten until the woman's shoulders strained. Elena had lived in Los Angeles for 55 years. She had buried a son who never came home after a routine traffic stop. She recognized the sound of fear even through the camera's grain. Her voice carried a quiet resolve as she whispered, "The city needs to see this." She uploaded the recording at 4:13 a.m. and added nothing to it. The truth spoke loudly on its own. The video found its way across phones before dawn. It spread from neighbor to neighbor, from street to street, from South Los Angeles to Santa Monica, and then into the national bloodstream. By sunrise, it had been viewed more than 2 million times. At the same time, inside the 77th Street Division, Derek Reynolds and Thomas Benson walked into the roll call room with the casual arrogance of men who believed they had done nothing wrong. Reynolds reenacted the moment he yanked Aisha from the car as if it were entertainment. Benson laughed and said, "She will think twice before driving here again." Their voices carried across the room. A few officers shook their heads but said nothing. Silence had become the culture. Silence had become the shield. In the far corner stood Jamal Rivera, a quiet man of 27 with steady eyes and a conscience that refused to bend. He listened to Reynolds and Benson with a heaviness that settled deep in his chest. He had joined the department to protect people, not degrade them. He had seen patterns that troubled him, but he had not yet seen something so clearly wrong. He looked at Reynolds's body camera dock. The screen flashed a single message: file corrupted. He checked Benson's. The same message. Both cameras had malfunctioned at the exact same moment. He did not accept that as coincidence. He slipped a small drive from his pocket. He knew how to access the internal buffer. If the truth exists, he whispered to himself, it deserves to be seen. He copied every hidden frame. He kept his movements silent. He did not tell a soul. While he worked, Aisha reached her hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed. The pain in her wrists pulsed with each heartbeat. She took a slow breath and looked at the faint red marks left by the cuffs. She let the weight of what had happened settle for only a moment. Then she returned to the purpose that had brought her here. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small encrypted device. It held her own body camera footage. She connected it and watched the moment Reynolds grabbed her arm. She watched the violent turn. She watched the rain fall over her coat. She watched herself kneeling beside the car, silent and still, because silence was the only safe option. She watched it all without flinching. When the video ended, she pressed her thumb to the encrypted seal and sent the file directly to Commissioner Hale and the federal liaison assigned to him. No explanation, no commentary, only the truth. At 9:12 a.m., Sarah Winters sat inside the Los Angeles Times office reviewing overnight submissions. She stopped when she reached the anonymous package sent through the encrypted Dropbox. Inside were two files. The first was the full body camera buffer from Reynolds and Benson. The second was the ring footage already circulating online. She placed the videos side by side. She adjusted the timeline. She watched the beginning again and again until she understood exactly what had happened. Her breath tightened as she whispered, "This is a pattern, and someone buried it." She immediately reached out to her editor. "We have another case," she said, "and it is from 77th, outside the newsroom. The city moved toward a storm. Social media filled with questions. Who is the woman in the video? Why was she treated this way? Why were the cameras off?" Elena's recording became the focal point of the morning news. Her voice appeared briefly on a local station. She said only 6 words. "I filmed what they tried to hide." By noon, Aisha received a message from Commissioner Hale. "You will be released from cover soon." "Not yet. Stay silent. The storm must grow before the truth arrives." She understood his meaning. Public pressure would force action. Lawful change required undeniable evidence. The city had to see the pattern before they would accept the cost of reform. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed, and steadied herself. Across the precinct, Reynolds and Benson continued their morning with the same unshaken confidence. They did not yet know the world outside the station had turned. They did not yet know their faces circulated across every corner of the city. They did not yet know that their actions, once hidden behind silence and corrupted files, now stood exposed. Jamal stepped outside with the small drive in his pocket. He knew what he held could change everything. He also knew it could cost him his career. He looked at the neighborhood around him and remembered why he joined the department. His voice was soft but certain. People deserve better than this. He sent the files anonymously to Sarah Winters and to a civil rights attorney he trusted. He placed the drive deep into his pocket and walked back into the station without a word. As the day unfolded, the city continued to push toward a breaking point. The evidence had begun to bleed into the open. The truth had taken its first breath, and the silence that once protected the division had begun to fracture. Aisha watched from her hotel window, her breath steady, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The city was waking up, and the reckoning she had come to start was now inevitable. Morning broke with a tension that moved through Los Angeles like a single breath held too long. The video of Aisha's assault spread faster than any official could contain it. By noon, South Los Angeles had already begun to gather. Mothers who had lost sons, fathers who had buried daughters, workers returning from night shifts, students carrying the weight of memory. All moved toward the 77th Street station with a quiet force that could no longer be ignored. At the front walked Elena Ramirez, the woman whose ring camera had given the city its first unfiltered look at what had happened. She held no sign. She raised no voice above the others, yet her presence carried the gravity of a mother who had endured too much to remain silent. The crowd followed her down the street in steady steps. Their chants rose in waves. If they do this to a woman in a suit, what do they do to our children? The words echoed with a painful clarity, each syllable striking the heart of a city that had spent years avoiding the truth. Inside the station, officers watched the gathering crowd through small windows. Some felt unease, others felt defensiveness, and a few, like Jamal Rivera and Kyle Chen, felt something deeper than fear. They felt accountability rising at a pace that could not be slowed. Jamal stood at his desk, the weight of what he had released still fresh in his mind. He knew the risk he had taken, yet he felt no regret. He whispered to himself, "Let the truth speak," and returned to his duties with quiet resolve. Kyle, younger and still early in his career, looked at the screen in the break room where the footage replayed. He felt a tightening in his chest. He had joined the force to protect lives, not to watch them diminished. He did not say anything aloud, but his silence held a promise that would shape his future. Across the city, the Department of Justice reviewed the materials sent overnight, the body camera buffer, the ring footage, the anonymous statements from within the precinct. All painted a pattern too clear to ignore. By afternoon, the Deputy Attorney General issued a formal directive: open a full pattern or practice investigation into the 77th Street Division. The order moved swiftly through federal channels. A team was assigned. Files were pulled from archives. Histories were examined. The sentence traveled from Washington to Los Angeles in seconds, yet its consequences would ripple for years. Aisha remained undercover through the morning. She kept her presence concealed while the city reacted to the truth. She watched the protest from a distance, her posture still, her thoughts steady. She understood the weight of the moment. She understood the cost the city had already paid, and she understood that the time to reveal herself had not yet come. Her role now was to observe and gather what she needed for the final step. She returned to the files she had begun reviewing: old complaints, closed investigations, signatures that repeated themselves over hundreds of pages. She found the name Lieutenant Frank Barnes again and again. Each time it appeared, it marked the end of a complaint, not a resolution. She counted the cases carefully. 1,847 closed under his supervision. Not one sent to discipline. Not one forwarded for review. A pattern built on silence and fear. At noon, she discovered the signature she knew would become the cornerstone of the investigation. Former Captain Robert Harrison. His pen had moved across dozens of pages with a steady uniformity, closing cases without interviews, without hearings, without evidence. He had created a structure that allowed patterns to survive untouched. As she reviewed the files, she felt the shift inside her. She understood the shape of the system she had been sent to dismantle. Its roots ran deeper than the assault on Rodeo Drive. They reached into years of oversight failures, buried complaints, and a culture that valued protection over truth. Back at the protest, Reynolds and Benson received messages that shook their confidence. Anonymous texts arrived within minutes of each other. "Retract your report or your family's pay." Benson read the message twice, his hands trembling. Reynolds clenched the phone with a rigid grip, his jaw tight. They looked around the station as if expecting someone to step out and identify themselves. No one did. Their silence was now filled with fear they had not felt the night before. Their actions, once carried out with certainty, now threatened the ground beneath them. Aisha returned to her hotel room that afternoon and found something waiting at the door. A small envelope. No name, no signature. She paused, lifted it carefully, and opened it with controlled movements. Inside lay a single bullet. Wrapped beside it was a small photograph of her teenage daughter, smiling on a clear afternoon, unaware of the threat now tied to her mother's mission. Aisha held the picture in one hand and the bullet in the other. Her breath slowed. Her eyes closed for only a moment. When she opened them, her resolve deepened. Someone inside the department feared what she would uncover. Someone believed intimidation could silence her. They had made a grave mistake. Inside City Hall, the mayor and city manager met in urgent discussion. The mayor felt the pressure of re-election. The city manager felt the pressure of budget and liability. Their concerns were political and financial, yet neither could deny the truth seen across the nation that morning. The city could no longer bury the cost of silence. They authorized emergency meetings with federal officials and community leaders. They prepared statements that would attempt to ease tension, though none could quiet the storm now rising. As evening approached, the size of the protest doubled. Elena stood at the front with a calm strength that anchored the crowd. She looked toward the station, not with hatred, but with the clear eyes of a mother who had learned the cost of denial. The chants grew louder. "We want the truth. We want accountability. We want justice." Their voices carried across blocks, reaching the officers inside, reaching the halls of City Hall, reaching the quiet spaces where decisions would soon be made. Aisha stepped outside as the sun lowered. She watched the movement of people across the street. She watched the unity that formed without fear. She felt the weight of the bullet in her pocket. She felt the responsibility on her shoulders. She whispered to herself, "The mask will come off soon." She knew the moment of revelation was near, but tonight, she remained unseen. Tonight. She allowed the city to speak first. Tonight. The fire needed air. The day ended with a truth the city could no longer deny. The evidence was no longer hidden. The voices were no longer quiet, and the walls built on silence had begun to crack. Aisha stood in the dusk, steady and composed. She looked at the horizon with a calm certainty that came from years of sacrifice. Tomorrow, the next step would come. And when it did, the world would see who she truly was. The morning of the change of command ceremony arrived with a stillness that carried its own weight. Officers from every corner of the department gathered in their dress uniforms, their rows precise, their faces composed for a formality they believed they understood. The mayor stood in the front row with guarded confidence. City manager Laura Greer maintained her careful posture, aware that the entire city waited for a signal of stability. Reporters lined the edges of the hall, their cameras steady, their attention fixed on the podium where Commissioner Marcus Hale would speak. Yet none of them knew what was about to happen. None of them expected the revelation that would break the room open. The officers shuffled quietly as the ceremony began. Hale stepped forward with deliberate calm. His voice carried a steady strength. Effective today, the Los Angeles Police Department's 77th Street Division will receive new leadership. The room listened. No one breathed deeply. Hale continued. This division has faced challenges that demand an honest reckoning. Your new commanding officer has the experience, the discipline, and the courage to bring that reckoning forward. Reynolds stood near the back, fully expecting someone he recognized. Benson stood beside him with a nervous stiffness he could not hide. Walsh watched the stage with a practiced expression that concealed the worry rising beneath his uniform. Hale paused for a moment that seemed to stretch across the hall. "Please welcome Captain Aisha Johnson." The doors opened. Aisha stepped inside with a controlled grace that held the room in absolute silence. She wore a full Class A uniform. Her captain's bars gleamed at her collar. Her medals rested in quiet order. Her posture carried the authority of someone shaped by years of service and sharpened by a mission that had already cost her. The faint bruises on her wrists, still visible beneath the cuffs of her sleeves, told the truth without a single word. She walked with calm steps through the center aisle. Every officer turned toward her, some with confusion, some with disbelief, some with fear that tightened their breath. She reached the stage and faced the room with a steady expression. No anger, no triumph, only purpose. Reynolds went pale. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw locked as if trying to deny the truth unfolding before him. Benson's knees weakened. He gripped the back of a chair to keep himself upright. Walsh looked down at his polished shoes. Unable to meet her eyes, in that single moment, the weight of their actions returned to them with a force they had never expected. The woman they had dragged, slammed, and humiliated in the rain stood before them now as their highest-ranking superior. Their power vanished in an instant. Commissioner Hale stepped aside and allowed Aisha to approach the microphone. Her breath remained steady. Her voice carried clearly across the room. "Thank you, Commissioner." She paused. She let the silence settle so every person would hear what came next without distraction. "I stand before you today not as a symbol. I stand here as your commanding officer." She let the words anchor themselves. "Some of you have served with honor. Some of you have earned the trust of the communities you are sworn to protect, and some of you have abandoned the oath you once took." Her tone did not rise. It remained calm, formal, unwavering. "That ends today." She looked across the room and saw the faces of the officers who had harmed her. She did not dwell on them. She addressed the entire division, effective immediately. Body cameras will be active at all times. There will be no exceptions. Anyone who fails to comply will be removed by sundown. A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Knowing the policy had been ignored for years, Aisha continued, her tone measured. "All complaints previously closed without review will be reopened. Every case, every file, every signature, this division will no longer hide truth beneath paperwork." She glanced toward the mayor and city manager. Their expressions revealed a quiet understanding that they were no longer in control of the moment. Aisha returned her attention to the officers. "Some of you will welcome this new direction, others will resist it. Those who resist should understand one thing. I have seen what happens when a department loses its way. I will not allow it to continue here." Her words carried the authority of someone who had lived the cost of misconduct. She did not mention her brother. She did not mention her undercover ordeal. She did not need to. The bruises on her wrists carried the meaning for her. She paused long enough for the weight of her message to settle into the minds of everyone listening. This division is no longer a place where silence protects wrongdoing. It is now a place where truth will decide your future. Officers who once felt untouchable felt their footing shift. Those who had hoped for change felt an unfamiliar sense of relief. Aisha closed her remarks with a final promise. "I will lead from the front. I will earn the trust of this city, and I expect every one of you to do the same." She stepped back from the microphone. The room held its silence for several long seconds. No applause followed. Respect did not yet exist, but something else had taken its place. Awareness, accountability, and fear for those who had built their careers on coercion and secrecy. Commissioner Hale joined her at the center of the stage. He placed a formal hand on her shoulder, then addressed the officers with a brief statement. "This department will stand behind its captain. Those who cannot support lawful reform are free to leave." His tone left no room for debate. He then turned and offered Aisha the commanding officer's tablet. the symbol of control over the division. She accepted it without hesitation. Reynolds stepped backward, trying to hide his trembling hand. Benson avoided her gaze entirely. Walsh closed his eyes for a moment, as though the truth he had refused to acknowledge had finally reached him. Aisha watched all three with a steady calm that offered no comfort and no threat, only consequence. As the ceremony ended, the officers filed out with quiet steps. Conversations were hushed. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Others walked with their heads down. Aisha stood at the front of the hall, greeting no one, shaking no hands, making no gestures for approval. She remained still, composed, and ready. The truth had finally stepped into the light. Her mask had come off. Theirs would come next, when the room emptied. Aisha walked out into the corridor with the weight of command on her shoulders and a clarity that steadied her breath. The storm had entered the building, and for the first time in years, the 77th Street Division understood that change was no longer a promise. It was an order. The reckoning began before dawn, moving through the city with a precision that left no room for denial. Federal officials arrived at the 77th Street Division with sealed orders, their presence marking the first full-scale intervention Los Angeles had seen in years. Oversight boards convened emergency sessions. Civilian review committees gathered evidence with renewed authority. Every file, every closed complaint, every name connected to misconduct rose to the surface. Aisha entered the building that morning with the calm of someone who understood the cost of truth. She walked through the hallway with her tablet in hand, reviewing case lists that stretched across hundreds of pages. She paused at each name with quiet intention. Reynolds, Benson, Walsh, Barnes, Harrison. The pattern was now visible to everyone. What had once been buried beneath years of silence emerged with a clarity that shook the foundation of the entire department. By mid-morning, federal investigators opened 43 separate inquiries into incidents tied to the division. The evidence was overwhelming. Aisha watched the process unfold with a measured discipline. She accepted no shortcuts. She allowed no delay. When she met with the oversight chairs, she spoke in a steady tone that guided the room. We will let the facts speak. We will not rush, and we will not bend. Her voice held the weight of both authority and restraint. She knew the city was watching. She knew the families of victims were waiting. She knew officers inside the division feared what the truth would reveal. She kept her posture firm, trusting the process she had built. The first suspension came before noon. Derek Reynolds was escorted from the building without his badge, his gun, or his certainty. He walked with a stiffness that betrayed his rising fear. The arrogance he once carried had vanished. He avoided every pair of eyes that watched him pass. Aisha stood at the end of the hallway, waiting for him to be processed. Their eyes met for one brief second. There was no anger in hers, no triumph, no bitterness, only truth. His gaze fell immediately to the floor. He could not withstand the weight of her presence. Thomas Benson followed an hour later. His hands shook as he surrendered his equipment. He whispered to the processing officer, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." The man recording his statement responded with a calm firmness. "It went exactly as far as you chose." Benson said nothing more. Frank Barnes, the lieutenant who had closed more than 1,000 complaints, received his summons in the early afternoon, when federal investigators confronted him with the signatures, the timestamps, and the contradictory evidence from community witnesses. His composure cracked. He asked for a private conversation. He requested counsel. He lowered his head into his hands. By evening, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. He detailed the structure of the internal network that protected misconduct. He named officers. He described meetings. He provided the financial trail of union payoffs and political favors. His statement filled pages. It also confirmed what Aisha already knew. The corruption had not been accidental. It had been engineered. News of Barnes's cooperation spread through City Hall and the precinct with unsettling speed. The mayor called an emergency briefing, his voice tense as he spoke to the cameras. This is a difficult moment for the city, but accountability is the path forward. His words were measured, cautious, shaped by the upcoming election. City Manager Laura Greer, standing beside him, understood the financial cost that awaited them: tens of millions in settlements, legal fees, retraining budgets, restructured oversight boards. Yet neither could deny the necessity. The city stood at a point where silence was no longer possible, while the political statements unfolded. Aisha remained focused on the internal hearings. For 9 consecutive days, disciplinary proceedings took place in a public courtroom. Cameras recorded every minute. The gallery filled with residents from South Los Angeles, families of victims, officers seeking clarity, and reporters from across the country. Maria Torres, once aligned with the old culture, now stepped forward with a strength that surprised even her. She spoke clearly about the intimidation she had witnessed, the falsified reports she had been pressured to sign, and the silent fear that kept younger officers from speaking out. Her testimony carried weight because she admitted her own failures. "I stayed quiet," she said, "and silence cost lives." The room absorbed her words with heavy reverence. Jamal Rivera stood guard outside Aisha's office during each hearing. He did so not because she asked, but because he understood the risk she now faced. Anonymous messages had begun to circulate, threats disguised as warnings. Aisha acknowledged them privately but remained undeterred. She looked at Jamal once and said, with steady patience, "Do not carry my fears. Carry your duty." He nodded, yet remained at her door each day. The verdicts came at the end of the 9th hearing. The presiding commissioner read each decision with deliberate clarity. Officer Derek Reynolds, 2 years probation, civil judgment of $4.2 million in compensatory damages. A collective murmur moved through the courtroom. Reynolds bowed his head, knowing he faced bankruptcy. Officer Thomas Benson, 5 years state prison for aggravated assault. Benson closed his eyes, letting the sentence settle like a stone. Sergeant Michael Walsh, immediate termination, loss of pension, subject to continued civil litigation. Walsh's face tightened, but he offered no response. Lieutenant Frank Barnes, 3 years federal prison for conspiracy and obstruction. Barnes accepted the outcome with a nod, his cooperation having spared him a longer sentence. Former Captain Robert Harrison, probation, permanent ban from law enforcement. Harrison's face held no emotion, yet the shame that followed him out of the courtroom spoke for itself. Outside, the crowd stood in silence as each man was escorted to waiting vehicles. Families watched. Reporters spoke quietly into their microphones. Elena Ramirez stood at the front of the gathering, her eyes steady, her breath controlled. She had waited years for a moment that acknowledged the pain her community had carried. When Aisha stepped outside, Elena met her with a nod of recognition and quiet gratitude. No words were exchanged. The moment required none. The reckoning had arrived. It did not bring celebration. It brought truth. And it brought the beginning of a transformation the city had long been denied. Aisha walked back into the building with the weight of what came next, resting fully on her shoulders. She had held the division accountable. Now she had to rebuild it. The work would be harder. The resistance would be fierce. But she did not waver. The path toward reform had begun, and she would not turn away. Rebuilding began the morning after the final verdicts, not with celebration, but with a solemn clarity that settled through the halls of the 77th Street Division like a long exhale after years of strain. Aisha arrived before sunrise, her steps steady, her resolve sharpened by the weight of what lay ahead. She understood that punishment alone could not heal a department shaped by fear, silence, and misguided loyalty. True reform required reconstruction at every level. She began by reviewing the leadership roster, line by line, marking names she would keep and names she would release. 58% of the command staff were reassigned or removed by noon. The decisions were firm, rooted in evidence, not emotion. Some officers accepted their transfers with quiet relief, others reacted with disbelief, unable to understand how the culture they had defended for years could vanish in a single morning. Aisha said nothing beyond the necessary instructions. She understood that clarity, not comfort, was her responsibility. By the afternoon briefing, the division felt as though a thick layer of dust had been lifted from its walls. The space did not feel new, but it felt possible. Hiring began immediately. Aisha met with the city's recruitment director and outlined a standard that had been missing for years. "We will bring in officers who reflect the communities we serve," she said. Her voice carried patience and firmness in equal measure. Within 2 months, 40% of new hires were women and people of color, selected through a process that emphasized temperament, communication, and restraint over mere tactical performance. The academy instructors felt the shift first. The questions changed, the priorities changed, and slowly, the atmosphere changed. Aisha visited the academy quietly, standing at the back of classrooms to observe. She did not interfere. She watched the instructors challenge assumptions that had long gone untested. She listened to cadets express the civic responsibility of their future roles with earnest conviction. She left each time with a quiet belief that the next generation would serve differently. Parallel to recruitment, she established the Civilian Review Board. It was the first in Los Angeles history with full subpoena and termination power. When she offered the chair position to Elena Ramirez, the conversation was brief. Elena listened, her hands resting calmly on the table, and asked one question. "Will the board have the authority to do what must be done?" Aisha answered with steady sincerity. Yes. Elena accepted, not out of ambition, but out of duty to the son she had lost. In the weeks that followed, the board met with community members, civil rights attorneys, and officers willing to speak openly for the first time. They reviewed cases with a discipline that surprised even federal observers. Their work brought forth transparency the division had never known. Training reform came next. Aisha required 40 hours of annual de-escalation and implicit bias instruction for every officer, regardless of rank or seniority. Some complained, some expressed open resistance, yet most understood that change was inevitable. When she appointed Officer Maria Torres as the lead instructor, the decision sparked quiet murmurs. Torres had once walked the edges of the old culture, but her testimony during the hearings had marked a turning point in her career. She accepted the role with humility and determination. Her first training session began with a statement that resonated through the room. "We are not here to repair our reputation. We are here to repair our responsibility." Officers listened with a mixture of discomfort and respect. Torres led the sessions with clarity, patience, and a willingness to confront the behaviors she once tolerated. Under her guidance, training shifted from obligation to reflection. As months passed, the numbers began to speak. Within 9 months, excessive force complaints dropped by 83%. The reduction did not come from silence, it came from change. Officers approached calls with measured judgment, supervisors enforced policy with seriousness, body camera compliance reached its highest rate in department history. Aisha reviewed these metrics each week with careful eyes. She understood that numbers could hide truth as easily as reveal it. So she also listened to stories. She held meetings with community leaders and asked direct questions. "Do you feel a difference?" Some answered yes, some answered not yet, but none answered no. That alone marked progress. Arrests decreased by 12%, yet convictions increased by 21%. A shift that reflected improved investigations and more ethical policing. Prosecutors noted clearer reports and more consistent evidence. Judges remarked on the change with quiet approval. Aisha did not celebrate these metrics publicly. She simply placed them on her desk, noted the trend, and moved to the next task. She believed that success should be measured by lived experience, not headlines. One of her most ambitious initiatives involved rebuilding trust through direct engagement. When the first Coffee with a Cop event in Watts was announced, she expected 50 residents. More than 600 attended. Parents came with questions. Elders came with memories of past harm. Teenagers came with cautious curiosity. Officers sat with them in plain clothes, not in armor. Conversations were respectful, sometimes painful, often hopeful. Aisha walked among the tables with quiet presence. She listened more than she spoke. She knew that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned through consistency. That day, she saw the first glimmers of a future where officers and residents could stand on common ground, inside the division. The atmosphere shifted in ways difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. Officers who once avoided accountability now sought guidance. Younger recruits approached their roles with dignity. Supervisors enforced policies with renewed seriousness. The precinct no longer carried the heavy silence that once defined it. Instead, it carried a cautious breathing space, a place where mistakes could be acknowledged and corrected without fear or denial. Aisha watched all of this unfold with steady commitment. She knew the work was far from finished. Reform was not a chapter. It was an ongoing discipline. She carried the memory of her brother, not as a reason for bitterness, but as a compass that guided each decision. At times, she walked the halls late at night, reviewing reports in the quiet hours when the building felt suspended in its own transformation. She paused at the window overlooking the city, thinking of the lives her officers touched each day. She whispered once, under her breath, "This is not perfection. This is progress." 9 months after the hearings, federal oversight officials visited the division for an evaluation. They reviewed cases. They interviewed officers. They walked the precinct halls without escort. Their final report was brief but powerful. The division demonstrates measurable, sustained, and meaningful reform. Aisha accepted the report with a calm nod. She did not allow pride to overshadow the responsibility ahead. The city had changed. The department had changed. But the work remained. She stepped out of her office that evening into the quiet hallway. The air felt lighter than it had when she first arrived. She walked toward the exit, her posture strong, her purpose intact. Rebuilding had begun on broken glass, and step by step, piece by piece, she shaped something worthy of trust, 1 year after the night that changed Los Angeles. Captain Aisha Johnson walked along Crenshaw Boulevard with a quiet steadiness that reflected the transformation she had fought to build. The city moved differently now. Not perfectly, not without tension, but with a sense of possibility that had not existed in years. As she stepped onto the sidewalk near a community center, children recognized her first. They ran toward her with open arms, calling her name with an affection that softened the weight she carried. She smiled and knelt to greet them, her hands gentle on their shoulders, her voice calm as she asked about their school day, their families, and their hopes. Their trust meant more to her than any public ceremony. It meant the reform had touched real lives. It meant violence no longer felt inevitable. It meant the city had taken its first honest steps toward healing. Elena Ramirez approached from the doorway of the center, her presence carrying the same strength she held the day she released the video that changed everything. She now served as the official civilian oversight chair for the entire city, elected by residents who believed in her steady hand. Her leadership brought transparency to a system that once hid truth behind closed doors. When she reached Aisha, they exchanged a quiet nod that spoke of shared battles, shared loss, and shared resolve. They had become pillars for different sides of the community, united by purpose rather than position. Elena looked at the children still gathered around Aisha and said softly, "This is the world they deserve," Aisha answered with a calm certainty, "and we will keep building it across the city." Consequences lived alongside change. Derek Reynolds now worked security at a small shopping mall, a role far removed from the authority he once wielded with reckless confidence. When he saw Aisha pass by the entrance on her way to a meeting with local business leaders, he looked away quickly. His posture folded inward, his breath tightened. He felt the full weight of the life he had wasted. Aisha did not stop. She did not speak to him. She simply walked with quiet dignity, allowing the moment to pass without bitterness. His punishment was not her concern. Her task lay ahead, not behind. Thomas Benson spent his days in state prison, sober for the first time in years. In his small cell, he wrote letters of apology addressed to Aisha, to the department, and to the community he had harmed. He never sent them. He understood that forgiveness was not a right. It was a grace he had not earned. Yet he wrote the letters all the same, hoping that naming his failures might one day help him understand the man he had been and the man he could still choose to become. Aisha never thought about him except in moments like this, when her work reminded her how many lives had been shaped by small decisions made in seconds. She wished him accountability, not cruelty. Inside the 77th Street Division, new leadership continued to grow. Jamal Rivera. Once a quiet rookie overshadowed by corruption he could not publicly confront, now wore the stripes of a sergeant. His calm judgment and steady loyalty had made him a trusted figure among younger officers. He used his promotion not for authority, but for guidance. He mentored carefully. He held standards firmly, and he reminded officers each day that policing required both courage and humility. Kyle Chen, even younger and still early in his career, now ran the Youth Outreach Unit. His work connected officers with teenagers who had once known only fear of law enforcement. He used open conversations, consistent presence, and honest language to build understanding where division had lived for years. Aisha watched both men with pride that remained quiet, but genuine. They represented the department's future, not its past. The Los Angeles Times published a retrospective on the anniversary of the investigation. Its headline carried a weight that captured the long arc of the story. From bruises on a captain's wrist to a revolution in policing, the article described the night of the assault, the federal intervention, the hearings, the reforms, and the changes felt across neighborhoods once accustomed to sirens and sorrow. The reporter called Aisha the architect of a new chapter in Los Angeles policing. She read the words only once. Praise did not guide her. Duty did. She folded the paper and placed it in her drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the responsibility she carried each day. That evening, as she stood near the roof of a downtown building after a long meeting with federal advisors, her phone rang. She recognized the number immediately. It belonged to the United States Attorney General. She answered with a composed tone. The voice on the other end carried a mixture of respect and anticipation. "Captain Johnson," the Attorney General said, "your work has been studied across the country. We have 12 more cities on the list, cities facing the same failures, the same patterns, the same need for courage. Are you ready to take on the next mission?" Aisha looked out over the lights of Los Angeles. They moved like a quiet river beneath her. She felt the weight of the question, the responsibility, and the cost. She also felt the strength she had built through loss, through confrontation, through hard truth and steady conviction. Her answer came with calm certainty. I was born ready. She ended the call, stepped away from the rooftop rail, and allowed herself a single moment of stillness. The year behind her had been defined by pain, truth, and rebuilding. The year ahead would demand even more. Yet she did not fear it. She understood her role. She understood the place she held in the struggle for justice. She understood the lives that depended on the next decisions she would make. She placed her hand lightly over the faint scars on her wrist, a reminder of the night that began this movement, and whispered a quiet promise meant only for herself. The work will continue. Then she walked down the stairwell with steady steps. The city waited, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it meant something to you, please subscribe and give this video a like so more stories can reach those who need them.